6:30. All meeting to order, City of Phoenix Planning Commission meeting, Monday, February 24th, 2025. It is 6:30. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Luz, Commissioner Monceau, Commissioner Hanson, absent. Commissioner Helfrich,
Here.
Commissioner Adams, here. Commissioner Norpshin, Commissioner McFadden. Okay, we have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. At this time, we'll start out with for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. Thank you. Ooh, I skipped over roll call.
We did it.
Oh, I did not. No, wait a minute.
We did.
I did roll call. So minutes for February 10th.
We did skip over approval of the agenda. We'll get to it.
I'm sorry.
Well, we've got number 3 first. Approval of the agenda.
That's what I just said.
Okay, good.
Yeah, approval for minutes from February 10th.
Okay.
Second.
You weren't here. Sorry. Has to be. Oh, were you there? Okay, well, sure. Okay, first, then we got a second. Okay, we got a first and a second. You're thinking about something.
No, I'm
Okay.
good.
Anyway, roll call on that, please.
Commissioner Luz,
Yes.
Commissioner Monceau, Commissioner Hanson is absent. Commissioner Helfrich,
Yes.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Adams. Yes. Commissioner Norpshin.
Yes.
And Commissioner McFadden. Okay, motion passes.
Motion passes. So public comments at this time, this item is for a person wanting to present information or raise an issue not on the agenda. And there's agendas available over there to comment, to allocate 3 minutes. There's a sign up sheet. Is there anybody on the sign up sheet? Take a look. Okay, we have somebody on Zoom. So we ask that you state your name, address. That's kind of it right there.
I suspect Mr. K may want to speak on the agenda item.
Correct.
Commercial highway.
On the agenda item, but we have somebody that wants to speak on a non-agenda item, correct? And he's on Zoom? Okay, so with that, we have nobody to speak on public comment. So, so at this time, we'll go into new business discussing DC 24-01 Development Code Amendment, LDC Chapter 2, continue with page 4. So we'll turn it over to Mr. Wilcox. My question is this. We all had opportunities to send in questions. Did you have any questions sent in that you'll be addressing?
Well, I know Commissioner McFadden was working feverishly to provide something, but I think we had produced a deadline. So we could discuss tonight and I'll take feedback tonight if you like.
Okay.
So otherwise, no.
So you want to hold off on questions till after your presentation or during your presentation?
I'm open to whatever format you like. We can go line.
It's your floor.
You want to go line by line? We can do it. I kind of summarized in the staff report what appeared to be the biggest changes, but sometimes that's all in the eye of the beholder too. Um, um, my invitation would be, Commissioner McFadden had some input. I'd like to hear what she had. Was it just regarding that use table on commercial highway, or were there other comments as well?
Yeah, no, it was just a general thing that as you go through the net, whenever the consultant had those questions, that it's helpful for me as a commissioner to have information about it. So for example, one of the first ones in the commercial highway is 86, in question 86. She says, is there a reason why retail sales are divided more or less 30,000 square feet and wholesale was 20,000 square feet? When there are questions that are posed like that, it's helpful for me to know what the staff, if there's an answer to it. So it was more of a general thing, instead of going line by line and saying every time, is there a reason, and re-asking the question. I just think it was helpful to have that background for me and this is not.
Well, we can't respond to it. She's posing a question. And we are not capable of responding to it, are we?
Oh, well, I think that, staff could weigh in, because we have old archival copies of the zoning code. We could look back. I did find this example particularly interesting because, it talks about basically square footage thresholds and it really reins in warehouse use at 20,000 square feet, but the retail one, 30,000. And when I think about this from like an intensity aspect, like I would see more vehicle trips, with something like a retail use. So I don't know what the reason is behind this, but it got me curious. So I can definitely follow up on this. And I think it's a great idea just generally just to, if there are questions from the consultants, I'm happy to dig into those and follow up. So I'll be keeping an eye out for those from now on. And, certainly when we get to the public hearing part of this, I'll have some answers to bring back.
Okay. We okay? So, Mr. Wilcoxon, the
Yep.
floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. So briefly then, I'll just touch on the staff report that was in the packet. A lot of the things the consultant pointed out as I was reviewing this was there are uses in that table that kind of blur the line a little bit. Like, what exactly is the difference between auto repair and vehicle service? And maybe we could consolidate these into something where it's like, all three. Or, is there a good reason for doing it? Is there some kind of vehicle related use that we want to parse out? What else? Same deal with personal and professional services versus retail sales and service. I am 100% with the consultant on this, where, retail sales and service is pretty all encompassing. So I would be supportive of consolidating definitions wherever possible. But if as you're reading through these, if you see use categories where you're like, no, I like the distinction there for this reason, that's good input to, for staff when we're making changes. And I know Mr. K wanted to talk about changes to the definition of cottage industrial. I think the broad strokes, he points out that artisanal manufacturing is a change in a change in definition, which I don't think he takes issue with that necessarily, but maybe the sideboards on each. So basically, backing up a little bit, artisanal manufacturing is a use category in the city center zone and the commercial highway zone. And there are special standards that apply to this use that are proposed to be different in each zone. And so I think Mr. K wanted to speak to those differences and had some input on that. So if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, we can ask him what his comments are, because we kept him waiting a while at the last meeting.
I have a question first.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So did you agree with Paul's comments? And would you like to use his comments in the code and change things to his liking?
He made some, I liked the points that he brought up. There was one scrivener's error, I think, that he caught, which we'll need to make a change about. And my preference would be that, like, and I think we can all walk away from this happy. My only preference would be if we have a definition for artisanal, what is it? Artisanal manufacturing, that it be the same in both zones. I would be very confused as a layperson if I saw, oh, artisanal manufacturing means one thing in this zone and something else in a different zone.
Sure.
So if different sideboards, though, regulating the use in either zone, totally supportive of it. And I think that's really the meat and potatoes of what he was getting at.
So you agree with the meat and potatoes of what he was getting at as far as the recommendation for the code?
I'm sorry, say that again.
So you agree with, as you pose it, meat and potatoes, what Paul has suggested?
Yeah, I think one of the points he made was about the limitation of like large trucks in the CH zone being kind of rough. And my gut kind of agreed with that. But that was one of the big takeaways. And Mr. K can probably do a better job explaining his, recommended changes than I could. So
Is there anything you disagree with what he proposed? Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. Well, why don't we hold,
Sure.
yeah, right. I agree. Let's, before we,
Yeah,
before we
I'd love to hear from Paul.
try to get,
I know Paul
before we
very
get
well.
opinions from staff or anybody, let's hear from Mr. K.
So I think you have click that ellipsis and then you can, yeah, I think that works too. Let's do that.
Hello,
Mr. K.
So
Can you hear
Mr.
us?
K, will you introduce yourself and your address for the record?
Paul K, 4495 South Pacific Highway, Phoenix. That's Phoenix Industrial Studios.
Hold on, Paul, we can't hear you.
Sorry, Paul, one moment. Technical difficulties.
What?
That's a first for me.
It's just audio.
Tony, did you hear something?
I heard him speaking out here somewhere.
Did you? So is it,
I think on last meeting, they switched the speakers so we got here. Yeah, well, there's a speaker over there.
Are you able to hear me?
Hey, Paul, can you say something so we can test the speaker?
Are you able to hear me?
Are you there, Paul?
Yes,
Yep.
I am hearing you.
We're actually hearing we're hearing you in the lobby speaker and not in our room, so we're trying to change it.
That kind of work.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
Paul, we're having some problems with the speakers. You're in the very front room, but we can hear you, so you have to speak up pretty loud, okay? So if you would state your name and address, we appreciate it to get started.
Let's try, if you turn on the chat, that might be more efficient.
I think we have you loud and clear now, sir.
Okay. Paul K, 4495 South Pacific Highway, Phoenix, Phoenix Industrial Studios. The comments speak for themselves. I don't know to what extent you've reviewed them. And if I knew that you reviewed them, I would just give you an overview. If you haven't reviewed them, I would guide you through it.
Well, let's go through it. There's two opportunities to do this at the public hearing, if or we could hear it now, so we could make changes early on.
Okay.
My understanding, this code revision is not making policy changes, but is cleaning up inconsistencies so that it can become part of the municipal code. And in the cleaning up of language, the consultant, Elizabeth Decker, suggested making the conditions for certain uses of city center and commercial highway the same for artisanal manufacturing. And that would be a significant policy change that would be in conflict with the comprehensive plan in many instances, and would diminish the opportunity for better paying jobs. Light industrial jobs pay better than retail. A community cannot make it on retail employment. So it's in the community economic development interest to keep a supply of land that has light industrial uses with the purposes intended as articulated in the comprehensive plan. That's what those notes are about. And I list, I think, 9 reasons and cite the code. The most significant is the requirement of, so I agree with a 5,000 square foot size limit to minimize impacts. I suggest, as was done in the TEC zoning, describe the impacts as a part of the definition of the use. The most significant concerns are the retail component, whether it be required for each individual user or the site overall. I see plenty of citations in state model codes for balancing the light industrial with retail in the mix of the site, but I have seen no example of each individual user. That would actually potentially make some of our successful uses non-conforming. The other concern is, major concern is the delivery vehicle access. The land layout in CH is very different from city center, and a restriction on 5 UPS vans a day would clobber the light industrial use and would be more restrictive than several other uses for which there is no freight restriction, but there is a freight necessity. And so I offered 7 conditions for that specific use. Some of it is language from the code, and some I offered additional language that I think you'll find compatible with the intent and the articulation of the comprehensive plan and the zoning code presently.
Was there anything else you wish to add?
Yes, I would love for you to have the opportunity to review the electronic document. There's a link to a Forbes magazine article that really says it very concisely, the importance of artisanal manufacturing to the economic development of the community in the contemporary economic conditions in a positive way.
Okay.
And I'm ready for your questions if you have such.
Is this appropriate for us to ask questions at this time? You're not prepared?
I don't see the harm in asking questions. This is going to go to public hearing. We got to notice it still, and people have plenty of opportunity to comment.
Okay, well, let's ask a few questions, and then we do have a new commissioner that's not prepared. We might have to table this or move it to the next time to talk about it. So I guess I'm looking for bullet points of the difference between this how do you say it, artisanal manufacturing in 2 different zones. We got the downtown, which kind of speaks for itself, and there's restrictions and there's things there that we want to encourage this type of manufacturing. And then we have highway commercial that we also want to see this kind of a thing, but it seemed like it'd be a bigger scale. Is that what you're saying, Paul?
No, that the conditions for permission for the use, it's an outright permitted use, and it's qualified, it's subject to special standards for certain uses. While the definition, the activities would be the same, the standards would be different between CH and CC.
Okay.
But it doesn't change the scale. It's limited to 5,000 square feet per each individual use. There is no limit on the overall size of the consortium, call it. And there's a funny nuance in here we have not discussed.
And what's that?
The condition that artisanal manufacturing use in light industrial presently includes the assembly of pre-manufactured parts or pre-processed materials only. It could be mistakenly implied to mean that all, and furniture making is a specifically mentioned use. And that could mistakenly imply the pre-manufactured parts only, that it's furniture's IKEA assembly, that there's no cutting of boards. And what I read the code to say is no raw material manufacturing. You can't take logs and turn them into 2x4s in light manufacturing or artisanal manufacturing, but you can take 2x4s and turn them into furniture.
Okay, Any-
So that point number one, where the artisanal manufacturing use includes the assembly of pre-manufactured parts, you might also include diminution. You can cut them, not just glue them together.
okay, that makes
And that
sense.
would be subject to not blowing sawdust and noise on your neighbor.
Gotcha. Okay. Mr. Wilcox, what do you, can you segue off of this in any way of saying that making sawdust is not what we want to do, but manufacturing is still manufacturing?
To
Well-
be clear, making sawdust would be allowed. You just can't blow it on your neighbor.
That's a good idea.
Thank you.
So my initial feedback would just be, artisanal manufacturing would, like the definition says, low levels of noise, vibration, air pollution, et cetera, right? So I think as long as it's captured in the definition, I do agree with what he's saying on raw material processing. Maybe, easing that up a little bit, massaging that to allow for furniture production outside of IKEA, where it's basically very heavily processed before it even gets to the shop. So I might be able to work with Zach to wordsmith that. Otherwise, I do like, it seemed like you were suggesting, a list of bullet points. The way my brain works, I like a clean definition.
Right.
I would like it to match the definition to be the same darn thing in both zones. And then any standards that govern them, because these two zones are different. I would prefer to see something like a set of bullets, bullet points for each. Like, here's the sideboards for the city center zone, and here's the proposed sideboards for commercial highway. So maybe that could probably be distilled out of this document that Paul gave us. Or maybe he would be so inclined as to put that together himself, between here and the public hearing. Just an idea.
Okay. All right. Did, Chris, did you have some, you had something you wanted, are we okay?
Well, I think Mr. Wilcox is making a ask of Mr. K to synthesize his thoughts down into a number of bullet points, hand them
Right.
back to the planning department, and maybe install those into recommendations for changes in the code. Is that what you want, Mr. Wilcox?
Just an idea. My only concern really is, like, if we did this, staff, maybe we miss something. It doesn't capture the essence of what he's suggesting.
Okay. And Paul, did you get that? Makes
Yes,
sense.
and I'd be
Okay.
happy to meet with you and come up with the bullet points, and the document proposes the 7 for CH and the same for the CC, the same as proposed.
And then you'll come back to us with the recommendations and we approve or
Sure.
disapprove, right?
Yeah, and
Thank you.
two, the distinction between the downtown and the commercial highway, instead of having it all kind of in one pot stirring around, separate the two of them.
Understood, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. K, for your input. It's respected and appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for your contributions to our community.
Would you like me to just proceed down the we'll hit the high
Let's
points.
go ahead and continue on with your presentation, please.
You got it. So if memory serves, we had just a small section left of city center when we were concluding our last meeting. And I think the last bullet point really was more policy related than cleanup. And that was just regarding the cannabis code for the city center zone. So something to be thinking about just between here and when it goes to public hearing is the consultant's recommendation is to take the cannabis and create a separate and distinct area in our code for cannabis production, sales, everything outside of personal use, and have that be its own set of standards. Instead of having in each zone a subsection that talks about cannabis. Because essentially there's a lot of, it's like literally several pages of the same darn thing, especially, some zones are more similar than others. So, and, just from my perspective, when I worked at the county, that's how they did it. They had a, chapter 3 that was everything cannabis was in 312 and, psilocybin was right after that. And so they didn't have to talk about it in the industrial and the residential and the, resource use and things like that because it was already in its own section. So something to be thinking about. I probably would put those in track changes unless I heard from you that no, you want to keep it right where it is. Because it's not policy changing really. It's just going to make it easier for people to know, okay, everything cannabis located in chapter 3 here now. Excellent. So it should be easier to interpret for people who have questions.
I know Commissioner Luz and I worked on this a lot. It seems like it's self-regulating because of there's no way you could have it in our downtown because of a church and school and so on like that because of the regulation from state that they have to be so far apart. So I don't even know how it's ever going to affect the downtown. Now, highway commercial, yes.
But what you're saying is keep the same rules and regulations regarding cannabis, just consolidate them into one section instead of being broken out into other sections. And I'm fine with that because we're not changing what we did a number of years ago. We went through that with a fine tooth comb and just literally maybe hundreds of hours. It was crazy.
Oh, yes.
I
believe it.
The amount of time that we spent on it. So just as long as there's no changes in the rules and regs, if it's consolidated, I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure everyone else agrees, but that's just
I
my
agree.
opinion. Yeah.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
if we have a consensus, then we could just give you the okay and.
Okay.
I'll make that
Hear
change. Excellent.
Does that answer your question?
Makes it easier to
Makes it easier.
much easier to administer and much easier to interpret from, the person at the counter, and they're like, hey, I want to, do this, that, or the other with cannabis. Here you go. So thank you. That's great. And I will make a note of that really quick.
That was a big move.
It is. Yes. No change to policy. And so just as a reminder, Zach the theory is this, right? To clean up the code, remove inconsistencies, make sure everything's in conformance with state law. And the fastest way to clean up the code is by being as policy neutral as possible. And so that's step number 1 for us. Step number 2 is getting this codified in the municipal code. And step number 3, that's where we'll circle back around and start tearing into policy that we're not in love with. So it's still on the menu, but ideally we'll try to be policy neutral. That said, if there's something where, the planning commission has consensus and I know this is policy or it borders on policy, we can make those changes too. It just might hang us up at the hearing. So, all right, we'll keep going. Did anyone have any, I guess we'll hit that at the end. I was going to ask for questions on the use table and the commercial highway zone, but I kind of get the feeling we'll just keep rolling. Just interrupt me if you want.
There's no questions. Please keep rolling.
Okay. Okay. So moving on then into the industrial zone. The biggest change here is that currently there are two subchapters, one for the general industrial and one for the light industrial zone. And the consultant recommends, for the sake of brevity and for ease of cross-reference, to basically distill both of these zones into one subchapter with one use table with just those slight differences, because there are so many similarities between our two industrial zones. So that was one of the big changes there. One of the things she pointed out was basically looking for feedback on lodging, restaurant, and auto-oriented retail from the LI zone. And I think this one deserves a little bit of research before I bring something back to you on this. But I'd be interested to hear from you if there are strong feelings about these uses in the LI zone. Okay, I'm going to research this one and we'll follow up. We'll circle back around on that one then.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
let me be recognized. So I just got a question regarding, general industrial versus light industrial. And I think of the old pear packing plant in Second Street as being general industrial versus light industrial. Maybe on the other side of the highway, we have a Stanley steamer in there and some other light industrial things. But she's suggesting take away those two differences or distinctions and make it all just one category. Am I hearing that right?
Not exactly. So she wants to keep the zones, but basically consolidate these sections of code because they are very similar. The industrial zones, like if you look at the use tables as they are right now,
Yes.
they're very, very similar. So
The code would, if you have a use, it would break it out between the light industrial zone, yes, and heavy industrial. No, or it's something like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
it would do that. Okay.
the use table, and let's see if it's even in our packet, so you could kind of
That's
get
fine.
a good eye on it. The packet. Okay, so here we go. Agenda packet, page 19.
Yeah, 18, 19.
So it's just a nice clean table now that has both zones in it. Because there was a lot of overlaps, so she felt like it
Mhm.
made sense to just consolidate them into one chapter. And then where there was divergence, that would be called out and like the special standards for certain uses.
Cool.
Let's see what else were the main bullet points here. So there was a little bit of cleanup too. A lot of our, gosh, I want to say almost, I can't think of a zone that doesn't require a screening of rooftop equipment. So that was another change. She kind of assumed that would apply to the LI zone since it applies to the GI zone and it applies to the commercial zones. It seems like kind of more of like a accidental omission. So that was, that's a change. And then she made a pointer that 258 A sub 3 references a list that is not in our code. So I think what makes the most sense probably is unless there's input from you all, the facade design list would emulate or would be similar for both zones. Like, so the building facade design standards would be the same for both zones. I think it was just a miss there. Let's see here.
I have a question.
Oh,
yeah.
That
Yes.
just seems. Like we might be lumping too much together. I can imagine there being needs for slightly different. And. I don't know. It seems that there might be needs for differences between, in even the size of the building, potentially.
Okay.
Materials that the building would be made out of for noise and safety.
For facades,
Do you need?
for the facades.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just wondering if if that's just lumping too much together. I don't know.
So I see it parsed out oftentimes by the building size. So usually what folks are trying to avoid is a very large structure with no articulation in it, like no windows, no doors. And if there are doors, like our code usually calls for things like a canopy. At least I think that's how it goes in the GI zone. And so I think that what the consultant was proposing was basically do the same thing with the LI. But if you wanted, you could differentiate it and say, okay, a small industrial building doesn't necessarily have to do these things. Or maybe includes less of them than a large structure, something like that. Well, how about this? I like, what you had said, what other communities do. I could certainly look at some model code and follow up. But yeah, what I've seen just off the cuff is usually it's 20,000 square feet and greater. You got to do this, and it's just like it breaks it down that way. So yeah, so I could bring back some changes there with some red line at the next meeting, and just say, here's something for consideration, and then we can go from there.
Anybody else have anything?
Sounds good.
Okay. Continuing with your presentation.
Yes, if we can then, let's go to 2.7. I think it would be good too if Christina, could you pull up the presentation on the screen here just so they can follow along on their screens a little easier? Yeah, thanks.
I love the fact they put page numbers in here. So if you can just throw out the page number that you're on, that helps.
Yeah,
Trying to get better at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
we're on 19 now, right?
I think we're past it.
The agenda packet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. Yes. So there's a couple things that kind of like, before we leave the industrial code section, a couple of things that, it'd be good to get some input on. And she had mentioned, we have some non-conforming residences, and whether we want to allow for things like home-based businesses in these industrially zoned residences, and things like cannabis, use for personal use and things like that. These can certainly be tidied up at the point where we come back around for policy changes. But if you did have some, input on that, take it.
But if it's a non-conforming use, shouldn't you allow what you would allow for that use in other areas that are conforming? Because it is non-conforming use until, of course, it changes.
Right. So let me make sure I got this right. So is your question that because it's a non-conforming use, all those sub-uses that non-conforming use might enjoy should be permitted?
Yes.
Makes sense. When I, from my perspective, it's all about intensity and, negative externalities on your neighbors and things like that.
Yeah.
So I don't potentially see the harm. And I mean, especially because the consultant who does this for a community, she does this in all kinds of communities all day, every day. And so for her to say, hey, consider allowing people to do a home occupation in an industrial zone in their residential dwelling, like, it makes sense. So the old use table didn't make any mention of it. Actually, this is a weird thing. And so usually the way use tables work is if it doesn't make a mention of it, the assumption is it's not allowed. It's like everything in there. And if it doesn't, and that's why we had, a couple months back, we had that forest operations, appeal to the commission because it wasn't listed in that table, forest operations. And so, but there was something close to it. But I guess my point is this is that home occupation wasn't listed in the use table. And so, a strict interpretation of the code would be currently that it's not allowed. So this is the kind of thing where staff really likes your feedback on it because, we certainly don't want to, make discretionary calls.
But just the fact that it's a non-conforming use, you're not conforming to the dictates of that particular zone to
Mhm.
begin with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So this is, in my opinion, a
she said, yes, you should do
straightforward.
it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of it was surprising to me when I, saw that home occupations were only listed as a thing that you could do in a residential zone here. And so I talked to Zach about this. What happens when folks, because our commercial highway zone does allow for standalone residential uses if you're west of the I-5. So I was like, well, what about all the folks in Pacific, flats? And so I think we're all on the same page where it's like, yes, we want to encourage that kind of, small entrepreneurship and things like that, even if it's not residentially zoned, because the use is residential.
Yes.
Simple as that.
If you work it backwards, if you have a home occupation in that building, you change the zone. Are you going to go to that person, hey, you can no longer have your home business because we changed the zone? No,
Right.
it's still non-conforming until that person, tears down the building or
Right.
it has to come up to conformity.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. So love it. I'm going to make a note of that change too, just like that. We're all kind of
So
on the same
just
page
so
there.
that- just that keeping up with you guys in conversational feedback, but I understand.
Yes.
that we know about it, right?
Love it.
I think you're saying that we're allowing non-conforming use of home occupations in all residential areas. Is that right? And it's non-conforming because it's not commercial zone, so having an occupation in a residential zone is non-conforming, is that right? But that we want to allow that, is that what you're saying?
You want me to take that one?
Go for it.
Okay, so
Well, home occupation is allowed in residential.
it's allowed not in residential, but it's not allowed in an industrial zone or commercial highway zone. If you had a Subway restaurant, you couldn't have a home occupation in that same restaurant. It wouldn't make any sense. But let's say the business right across the street here, so there's a house right across the street, and the zone has changed. And we want to allow him to keep that house and live there. It's non-conforming. It's a residential use, for example, and you want to allow whatever you can do with a residential usage of a property anywhere in the city. And it's non-conforming, but he still has a residential use of that particular property.
That's to change the zone.
He's basically grandfathered in.
Yes,
And
that's
he would be grandfathered in but at time of application, if it doesn't fit the zone, then no.
right. But that word grandfathered in applies because he can still live there. It's a residential zone, and the uses that are allowed in residential zones are also grandfathered in, such as a home occupation business. I'm not sure there's any other uses that would apply. We get grandfathered in, but that's a good point. So he's grandfathered in.
Yeah,
To still live
because
there.
the zone got changed out from under him.
Yes.
And that's not, he didn't see that coming. But at time of application, if it's zoned wrong or he's in the wrong spot, then
Yep.
he would never be there.
And even if he doesn't have a home occupation, but wants to start one, he could say, hey, I've been living here for 50 years.
Yeah, I think
I own a house, it's residentially zoned, non-conforming, but why can I not have a home occupation? So what the consultant was saying, hey, you gotta allow a home occupation for that person, even though it's non-conforming. That makes sense? Well, am I not explaining it well?
kind of not.
So.
Okay,
That's my.
Yeah, I think. I agree. I think we're tripping over this a little bit, and I think that if you continue
Yeah.
on.
Okay. We'll keep cruising. So yeah, the LI code had very few changes except for like just housekeeping type things. I covered the list. I covered the rooftop mechanical. Let's see here.
So. I guess would it help us if we could have a map of what areas we're talking about? Can we pull that up?
Absolutely.
That way everybody can kind of get an idea of where we're talking and how it affects what it looks like, you know, size wise and the areas that are affected by this. And so,
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw in really quick if I could, like, apologies for those in the audience. I know it's kind of washed out up here, but earlier I was going to point out there's basically 3 industrial zones in our town. There's the holding zone, which will become the TEC zone. That's the darkest purple. And then general industrial is kind of the medium purple. And the LI zone is probably the smallest. There's only a few properties. And it's the lighter purple up near Pack Wall.
can we point to that pack wall
Can you zoom in a little bit?
right there, that triangle?
I believe those are some of the only LI properties.
And then there, of course, there's the old Norton lumber in that area there, and it's still zoned that.
Yeah, and if you click on the map, Christina, it'll even say the acreage of the amount of acreage in each zone. So click it. Excellent. And then do you see that right arrow on the bottom left? Like that. Okay, so there's not many acres of LI. So that was probably one of the reasons why the consultant was like, let's take out a section and merge these two together.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
this
do
is-
we, do, outside what's already established, do we have any empty properties that we should be looking at that would apply to what we're looking at today?
no, I mean, so certainly the commercial highway, right? Like big chunk of our town is commercial highway. And if you want to zoom out, Christina, that orange is what we were just in what Mr. K was talking about, all that orange. If you want to click that and we'll, you know, get an idea for how much acreage. So quite a bit.
So all the orange is commercial highway.
Yeah. And this zone is probably just something to be thinking about too, is as we go back through it again at the public hearing, is the commercial highway zone is one of the most permissive. It's got a large use table. And this is another one of those zones where it's like standalone residential is allowed within certain parameters. And currently the use table does not talk about home occupation and personal cannabis consumption. So, you know, just the kind of things we want to be thinking about. Do we want to allow home occupations in commercial highway? Because there's a whole bunch of residences in this zone.
So, so again, we don't have any industrial properties, bare land available. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. The
Except
TEC
for-
zone, the
except for
TEC, right.
Phoenix PH5,
Correct.
but nothing north. It seems like there should be some north.
Northwest on PH3, there might be one undeveloped property there.
Yeah, so those are all clear down to, I never think of that lane where it's Glenwood.
Yes.
What?
Just south of Glenwood, West Glenwood.
Glenwood, yeah. So everything between Phoenix and Glenwood, that's the only commercial industrial that we are addressing that's going to be applied to these things that we're talking about tonight.
Right.
And those are okay.
But it
I
all,
think it's good for everybody to kind of wrap their arms around that we could be looking at those coming into the future. That's our next, everything north, basically.
Yep.
So I think it's important for us to think about
Where
that
these changes might occur.
we're all dressed up where we're going to go here
Yeah.
after we get all this. Yeah. Okay. Nothing further than Glenwood. So really I know that at one time we were always having to have so much commercial industrial land for the size of Phoenix and all that. Looks like we're a little bit under meeting those needs of providing industrial land.
I think maybe a year before I got here, 2019, there was an economic needs analysis or something like
Right.
that.
That's what I'm thinking.
And I think that was the last inventory that was done. And I'm not 100% sure right where that landed, but I doubt that TEC would have been as easy to get into the city, PH5, if we hadn't identified a need for more like industrial employment type land. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
That answers my question. And please continue with your presentation.
okay. Okay, so we're just wrapping up the LI zone at this point. Some major change. No major changes to the zone, just the a move for the cannabis cultivation to be relocated. Let's take a look at the list here. A lot of the things proposed in the LI zone and the GI zone are more policy related. So come back to those. Since we're trying to steer clear of that for now. The last suggestion from the consultant on this section really was just a recommendation to have the design standards.
Page 23.
Let's see here. So basically have the design standards and the use standards swap to be similar to the other zones. To answer your question, I think it is on, between 23 and 26 in there. So she's just recommending making all the special standards for certain uses fall in the same sequence and then having the design standards right before that in each zone.
Okay.
Let's
Makes
move
sense to
on.
me.
Yeah, historic preservation. This will be a quick one because I believe this is all policy.
Before we move on, was there anything on that, folks, between 23 and? Okay. Yes, historical preservation overlay zone. What do we have there?
So the consultant wanted us to basically have the definitions for historic standards in this chapter and in chapter 1-3. For like what meets the threshold. Definitions for things like the review board and things like that. Let's see here. One thing she pointed out, this is going to be bordering on policy, I think, but the review process needs to be ironed out for how historic projects are reviewed. I think that might, while definitions, clearing those up is like a slam dunk, we might want to attack the review paths for everything at the third phase of this whole thing when we're doing the policy related stuff.
Currently, the review board is us, right? Historic Review Board is the planning commission.
Either the commission or the council. We don't get a lot of applications for this.
Yeah.
I will say that. When I was looking at the map, and they're shown on the map here too, if you guys are ever curious.
Yeah, we have a map.
Do you want to pull up the map really quick?
I see the council does on demolition of a historic building. That goes to council.
Good.
Because you and I had to put up with that.
Let's go to
Sure.
layers. Upper right. Layers in the upper right. And then we'll go to overlays. You want to expand that little bullet there for overlays? Down a little bit. There you go. And then we'll do historic preservation and turn on overlays, that checkbox overlays. And so if you zoom in, you can see them, they're little point features. So you can see like Phoenix Cemetery, and then there's a few residences usually located on the commercial highway zone at the south end of town.
What color are we looking at?
If you go back to the legend, Christina, they're little dots. They're kind of not super easy to see. Go back to the legend, upper right. There you go. So that's what we're looking for. They don't stand out well. I can fix that. But if you can zoom in, Christina, and then down south just a little bit more. So you can see the shapes here and there.
So isn't the our especially our downtown area here, isn't that all historic? A lot of historic. How old does a home have to be to be considered historic?
I think all those standards are something we're gonna have to work on.
Can you go to First Street? Yes.
But to answer your question, this was one of the first things I did when I got here was like find what data the city had for all kinds of important overlays, because we have like 8 overlays in our town. You know, trips, interchange development charges, historic, hillside slopes, Hillsinger overlay. I'm probably missing out on so many other ones right now. More vehicle trip reduction overlay. There's a few more, but anyways, so digitizing everything I could to answer it simply, this is the best historic layer I've been able to find, and I pulled it out of our comp plan.
So Jeff, if on the map right now, we're looking at First Street. And that 117 First is Jason Couch's house, which is definitely a historic house. Right, the corner of Church and First.
Yep.
Is it that little
The tiny square. I can make it bigger.
That little tiny purple square?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's
I can.
what shows it's a historical property.
Yeah. If you click it too, it might give a little bit of information. You got to click the square. It'll be a little tricky.
Oh boy, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it
Okay.
now.
Well, we can keep cruising
Okay.
along.
That's good to know.
Well, yeah, it's so just it stops right there at was that Church Street?
So the best data I could find was literally it would just list the address, why it was historic, and when it was decided, kind of a thing. And the comp plan map was a paper version of this, so I just took it and
Okay,
made it digital.
okay. I don't want to stall out on this. I just
No,
trying to look at
Talent has like
because I know
has
there
a
was
area.
homes on the west side of Church Street that were torn down because the council gave them permission, and they were historic homes and they were in good condition. It was sad, but anyway, sorry, it was just something in my heart that
No,
bothers me that
If I have missed a
seems like it
historical,
should be bigger. And I don't know what the definition of what year they were built or how they were part of the heritage of Phoenix. Anyway.
The commission is we don't have a historic zone, we just have historic sites. or
Right.
Houses.
Mhm.
Yeah, seems that way.
It just, you should see this out of the dots.
yeah, there's so much going on this map. I'll make them
So,
stand out more.
so are you looking for zoning for historic?
No, just.
We don't.
Historic district.
Correct.
District, you have zones that are, and we don't seem to have that, so it's just confirmed, we only have historic sites. Or houses, so there's just individual places left.
Is that something I feel it's something we should be considering is having. Exactly, yes. I think that we should have specific historic zones.
I can.
Well, I think when way back when in urban renewal, I think more like Kate's initiated what we're looking at here. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure. But if you had a zone, it would encompass houses that might be brand new. So it might be a brand new house that right next to Jason, let's say, near Jason's house is a historical zone. You could have 3 or 4 new houses surrounding a historical house. and that would be an historical zone. And if you did that, then all those new houses would have to conform to
Historical standards.
preservation standards. So the reason why it was done this way is because of what I just said. You have certain homes, like the old Culver house that burned down many, many, many years ago. That was an historical site and it burned down. So now someone that builds on it, it's no longer an historical site and they can build any way that they want because it's more the home versus the land, which is historic or needs to be preserved and have certain standards. You follow me?
Yes.
Yeah, makes sense. That's half the fun.
This is a meaty thing. Like when I'm reading the consultant's comments, it's like further consideration needed, future all over here, which future I'm taking is synonymous with a policy change. So we can make some changes to this code early on during phase 1 of these code revisions if you want. But basically the low hanging fruit here, the consultant was suggesting is just get the definitions clear. And then make them, put them in 2 sections, in the main definitions section in chapter 1 and also right up front and center in chapter 2.7. And that'd be a start. I think there was a question that was raised on like, who is the reviewing body for the review board? And yes, 273 Planning Commission is the review board.
Yes, please.
That, I mean, 274, all sites listed within, the comprehensive plan as stated. Oregon, and list a couple of things there. Could you go through those and confirm that with if there is, like, back in the comp plan, the definition of historic? And your question is there, and 50 years old, 100 years old, is there a working definition that would be a good reference to make in funds?
I like that.
Yes, please.
Also, if there were some way where properties could receive the designation of historic as a protective thing. I had this done back in my home in Maryland. We had a chance to either renovate or restore. If we chose to restore, so that the property would be there forever for generations, that all updates would be in kind with materials. We were not in a zoned historic area. The other half of our neighborhood was, which was all historic zone. So we were standalone, but we had to go through a process by which we were considered and accepted into that. And I would love to see that happen because I hate it when I see historic properties being raised. It breaks my heart because there's just so many things that are lost when this occurs.
There's several different inventories too that come to mind. I think there's a National Register of Historic Places.
Yeah, there
I
is.
think there's the state inventory. What I'd like to see is I am willing to bet that there is a model code that we could bring back to the commission and share with you that might have some suggestions for review paths. And maybe it's a quick win we can tack into this review.
Does Chris?
I think what Wendy is saying was already done. There's a guy named last name Kramer.
Oh, yeah.
He lives in Ashland and he was a history buff. This is what he did, is what you're talking about. He would come in and make recommendations for historic sites. And I think the city used him and his knowledge to go house to house to house to house to find out which sites are historic in nature and then put the dot on it. So what you're saying, I think, was already done some time ago. Maybe we can investigate to make sure. But I think what you said was already done throughout the entire city to find what the historic properties were, like the First Presbyterian Church,
Yeah.
you know? So I understand what you're saying, that you'd like to have, homes that you think are historic in nature be brought into this district, but I think that was already done. And it was done by a guy who was really, really knowledgeable.
Ours was a tax credit program.
Mhm.
When we did our restoration.
Yeah,
we received
exactly.
Tax credits.
Yep.
Percentage of what we spent, because it was quite an expensive restoration. But it was very rewarding for us. It was very rewarding for the neighborhood. And again, it can never be torn down. And if someone, for example, were to allow it to go into disrepair, then it would be absorbed by the county. The county would take over it and continue it as an historic property because of its history.
So, no, go ahead.
There's a process by which recommendations would be working before the city council and the properties to come into.
Okay.
So it's just in chapter in 2.7.4B.
Okay. All right, Jeff, please
Okay.
continue.
So I'm going to go ahead and see what I can find for model code and see if we can get that at the next meeting where we discuss this. And aside from this and the tightening down of definitions, those are the bulk of the changes for the historic overlay. From here, we can go on to, we can skip chapter 2.8 because that's nothing but future or policy related changes. So no changes will be going into this iteration. But there was some tidying up needed in the trip budget overlay zone. A couple of comments from the consultants. Again, she was recommending a clear definition. It's somewhat clear now. But she wanted a cross-reference also in chapter 1.3 because there are other references outside of the trip budget overlay zone. And I'm going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about it really quick because some of the commission is new and you may have questions on what the heck that is. So the trip budget overlay zone is something that was implemented around 2014-ish when the new interchange was
Correct.
brought in. And I believe that there were just discussions between, it was like the city and ODOT going back and forth, sort of like negotiating for how I think there was a concern there for overloading the interchange with quantities of vehicle trips going to and fro. And so ODOT, helped with that project. And so there was a trip budget imposed and assigned to each parcel in this area near the interchange is a certain quantity of trips. And it's on that map as well, if anyone's curious about it. I think it needs some cleaning up because that table is pretty old. And so that was another one of the consultant's comments. Do you want to go ahead and just turn on that layer really quick so I can kind of show them what I'm talking about? But okay, in a nutshell, trips. What the heck is a trip? So each use, right, has a certain amount of trips associated with it. Like fast food drive-through uses have a lot of vehicle trips associated with them. A single family residence has way, way less trips. So all these parcels, if you go into the, on the right-hand side, Christina, there is, hopefully it'll turn on. Yep. So it looks kind of, I think pinstripe is the word. It's like an up and down. It'll look better on your screens in front of you here. But so you can see these parcels are all affected by an artificial cap on vehicle trips, kind of similar to like a carbon cap, you know what I mean, for like environmental purposes. Well, there's an artificial limitation that ODOT has basically pre-approved. If a business and for instance, Phoenix corner there, Christina zooming in on it. one of the requirements for their project was to demonstrate that they did not exceed the amount of vehicle trips for that site with their multifamily project. So if you click on that overlay, Christina, it'll show you how many trips. Just do that right arrow thing again. So just, yeah, left click it. And then you see in the bottom left-hand corner of the pop-up, you can just cycle through the layers there. So there you go. You see that there's a parcel budget of 713 trips, and that's associated with the table in chapter 2.9. And so this giant tract of land here has 713 PM vehicle trips maximum. So whatever uses go in there can't go beyond that 713 number. Where do these trips come from? An engineer basically says, hey, if this use is going in here, this is the average amount of PM peak hour trips you can expect to come from it. So it's kind of heavy, this subject, but the consultant's recommendations were pretty clear. Just tidying up the definitions, and she kind of recommended pulling this table that's in chapter 2.9 out, this table that has for each parcel, because the problem is when someone goes to develop it, that table updates. And so it's not very tidy to have an out-of-date table in the zoning code, and people don't know how many trips are actually remaining there now. So that's kind of why I incorporated it in this GIS here, is because I found it just easier to use that way.
So you're saying throw the table away?
No, just I think her recommendation was to pull it out of the zoning code because the code.
I agree because nobody's monitoring it.
Well, that's the thing is it's the director's responsibility to maintain like a tally. And it's tough to do that when you have to every time we make a change to the code, we have to come to you to do it. So we should take that table out. And that's what she was recommending.
Absolutely take it out because
it's his responsibility to do it.
What's that?
It's his responsibility to keep this thing current, and it's hard to keep it current if we, because you need to get the code updated every time. So that's why we want to take it out.
We take it out of here, it's available online.
Yes, the overlay would not go away. The trips wouldn't go away or anything like that. It would just be, and I think there's a section in the code that says like the planning director will monitor this table for changes. And so it's changed quite a bit. And this is one of those tasks we need to.
It's a total moving target.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way you can pin this thing down. It came down from ODOT because it was based on traffic at this intersection here dictated most of it because this intersection here was under designed. But everybody's moved on and it's history and it doesn't even matter anymore. Mm-hmm. And then once North Phoenix is developed and then you got South Stage coming in. And so it's old traffic studies that dictated this whole thing. And that's too long ago to even consider anything in this, plus not monitoring. Yeah.
Right. One of the things that Zach and I are kind of working on is, so once we get that table cleaned up nice and pretty, accommodating for all this development that's occurred between 2014 and today, maybe having a conversation with ODOT to see if there's any chance to relax these rules, because there are a few parcels here where you don't have 713 trips allocated. It's more like one. And so, for instance, there's a few small lots that burned on North Bowles Road. There used to be single family homes there. Yeah. And so that's a development constraint, when it's there, because it was assumed there was going to be a single family home there forever. And so they got one trip. So this is something we're trying to work with ODOT to how do we fix this gracefully?
Yeah, it needs repair.
Yeah.
Are these future properties coming in, are they still paying IDCs?
They better be. There is, I can tell you everything that we've done. Yeah, for sure.
I'll bet most people know what an IDC is. Maybe you want to explain.
Oh,
Acronym-free zone, please.
oh, excuse me. Yeah, it's IDCs is that if you develop see, Phoenix came in with no money. It's like playing poker. We had no money and got this interchange built with the promise that IDC's interchange development fees would pay ODOT for this project because we didn't have any money.
Those interchange development.
Interchange development.
Charge.
It's like SDC, except it's interchange.
It's the
Same thing.
development
It's the same thing. Yeah,
Absolutely.
same
Development
thing.
charge.
Except it goes, they pay both.
It was-
And so that money helps pay off ODOT, which we'll never be able to do. That interchange costs so much. But yeah, with that interchange, we're fortunate to have it. Talent doesn't have it. And what it did for Phoenix, it was huge. It was a big project. And yeah, how Phoenix pulled that off. Representatives from ODOT would come down and drive through Phoenix looking for Phoenix. How did, I kid you not, how did they pull this off? It was huge. We didn't have any money. And, but that was the trigger point that made it happen. Was there a question over here? Sorry. The property owner. It's just like,
The developer.
No, we don't have anything to do with it. No, it's like a business comes in, they pay SDCs. Out there, you pay SDCs and CIDs.
It's the
interchange,
developer of that
IID.
property.
Yeah, to develop that property. And then that money goes to ODOT to pay for the interchange. Several million dollars. But anyway, yeah, so it does not fall back on the citizens. Good question. Does not fall back on the citizens.
Mr. Chair, I got a comment regarding the table.
I'm sorry.
So I got a comment regarding the table that we're discussing.
Okay.
So it's important for the developers to see this table. So if they come in and they want to develop a piece of property, if they can go into the code and if there's a link there to an updated table, that would help. And sometimes the property is developed and it's below the amount of trips. Those additional trips that aren't being used can be transferred to other properties. So that's what they mean by keeping up. If somebody comes in and uses all 713 trips, then there's no update needed. But if someone came in and there's only 10 trips, it's leaving 13 trips. It leaves 700 trips to be put on other properties to allow for development. So the houses that you mentioned, the 3 on Bulls Road that burned down, single family, you could transfer those trips to those homes to allow businesses to go there. So I think it's important that we link the trip table into the code so a developer could see how many trips, and then he can figure out how many bedrooms and the community and the development he can.
Here's the
develop.
problem. Here's the problem. It's like a trip bank. Okay, so
Yeah.
the trip bank's got so much in it, right?
Mhm.
We don't know how much trip's been taken out of it. There is no way, we don't know that. So we don't know how much trips are left in the bank and how many are gone. It's just, it's chasing something that we don't know. So to have a table that doesn't really give any information.
But our director's gonna find out that they're gonna work with ODOT and find out, right? And they're gonna update the table and link it.
Who is?
Zach Mood, well, it's up to the director of planning department to update the table. And they can check with ODOT in order to update the table. And that updated table is what developers want to see if they're going to develop a property. They have to know.
So we'll,
My question is, you're going to incorporate the table by reference, not the table itself.
Yeah.
So the table will be in there by reference, a link, a name, but because it's dynamic and it gets updated at a different pace, it needs to be a standalone document, not within this, so incorporated by reference.
That's the consultant's
That's what
recommendation.
I'm suggesting.
there you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's it. Well worded. Thank you.
It's gonna, well said, dynamic. But there is some work to do. Absolutely. I know in the time we've been here, Zach, me and Joe, we've been keenly watching the trip budgets and digitizing it. Even just grabbing this table took a little bit of doing, but there has been some development before our time that wasn't captured. So there is some tidying up of the data to do before we start a conversation with ODOT, just to make sure we're being honest and hoping for just a little grace
That's good
too.
news. That's good to hear.
The only thing I would have to say about stable and making it referenceable is just that it is somehow clearly available for folks and developers when they're trying to figure it out. So where will they go for that?
It's a resource.
What immediately comes to mind is similar to how Commissioner Luz was asking for links to OARs at the last meeting, is we would provide a hot link in the zoning code, which eventually will go to the municipal code, but just have a hot link that goes to a standalone table and, you know, a title at the very top that says this applies, you know, to parcels in the trip budget overlay zone, and do something like that.
Okay. Are we all settled
Makes
on
sense.
that?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's still needs an updating of that versus somebody calling the office and getting a live response or having something that's updated. So you're still updating it, so it's just not embedded in code. So I appreciate this just more.
All right.
Okay.
Let me make sure I covered everything in this section really quick. Okay. The very last section, nope, we have two. Okay. So we're going to move on to the setback overlay zone. Told you we have a lot of overlays. Let's see here. Actually, this one we can skip, which makes sense because Joe tidied this one up just probably a year or so ago. And the Oregon 99 setback overlay zone, just a quick explanation on why there's no changes to it. It's very basic. It's basically providing sufficient setback. So basically preventing people from building too close to the Highway 99 because of all these road expansion projects we've been seeing in that corridor. So practically what's been happening is, you know, because we've had a lot of development on the Highway 99 corridor, is we will have someone demonstrate either that their development meets that setback requirement or that ODOT has secured the right of way they needed. So this section of code is pretty clear and basic, and probably will sunset pretty soon after, you know, the ODOT improvements are finished. We'll come back to you and propose to strike it just for cleanup's sake, because, you know, once they're done exacting their right of way for the, you know, sidewalks and things like that, they won't need a setback anymore. Special setback. So no changes proposed there. Oh.
So say we need a buffer zone, or say we need a setback, but very rarely does it actually say what that setback or buffer zone is. So I would just say if you go through, if you can make sure that we're clarifying if a buffer zone is required, or a setback is required, that we're actually making sure to say what that is or referencing.
Yep. That's a great point. The buffer zone is language that, having to administer the code all the time, it's like, it's not well defined what a buffer zone is. Now, setbacks are very, very well defined. Buffering is well defined, but usually that's like just like landscape screening. So I think it would be a good housekeeping move to like basically homogenize those terms. Like, okay, setbacks are pretty clear already, but buffering versus screening, what is a buffering zone? Is that any different than buffering? So I'm going to make a little note of that too and see if I can just kind of discard maybe some inconsistencies there.
Okay. All righty.
What else? Okay, let's go to 211. In the presentation, do you want to jump to 121 or 122 rather? Item 122.
211.
Let's see here.
Well, our packet goes to two,
Yeah, we don't have 211.
Oh,
well, you know,
holding zone.
What is 211?
211 is the holding zone, and I did not include it in your packet. So
I'm sorry.
211, it was the last thing in chapter 2. I had intended to include it and I did not.
The
My
holding
apologies. So we could either, at this point, we've gone through all the homework we were gonna plan on doing. Did we have any just general questions or input? We'll come back to 211 next time, and we'll be done at chapter 2 at that point. We'll be on to chapter 3.
Isn't the holding zone simple enough to explain to us without seeing it in the packet and just getting done with chapter 2? The holding zone is, that's a great point. Very good. That's great. Thank you, Julia.
Well, so looking at the table though, the recommended change is policy related, which means it's likely something that can be deferred anyways. But yeah, we've basically covered all the homework I had hoped to cover. And now,
Well, folks, yeah, it went very well. So that's new business, and so no old business. So at this time, we'll turn it over to comments from commissioners. So yes, please.
Well, I wasn't a commissioner last time I was here. But there was a sheet that was passed around by Julia with regard to bringing someone in to do an overview and give us recommendations. And I never received a copy of that sheet, so I would like one if possible. And secondly, it would be very helpful, I think, for us to make a decision as to whether we want to have this happen. Because funding seems to be uncertain these days. And it would be really nice to make sure it was free to us if we decided to have it done.
Okay. Did you have some?
I think what she's referencing might be that it is, and just to her point, it is funded and given to us because of this forestry. So it could be tied to federal funds, and it may be subject to some of the federal cuts that are coming. So I think that might be helpful. We do have the fire maps also to change. The state, the governor said cease fire maps. That was a reason to kind of pause before, but I actually think because they're saying please work on fire maps now, and even once they get that clear, you've got a year probably of rulemaking before we see anything. I don't think that's a reason to pause anymore either, which was something in the back of my mind. So I kind of think it would be worthwhile to do that. To recommend to move forward.
I definitely agree.
But you're saying we should move forward with it, or we shouldn't move forward?
Yes, I would say we should move forward with it as soon as possible, because we can always find out if we have funding, and if there is funding that maybe waning, we want to try to get in on it before it would potentially go away.
So how do we move this to, I mean, obviously it's got to go to council. Well, and I know Zach was going to maybe bring that up, and in fact, Zach had talked about us setting goals.
yes.
And I think that would be one of our goals that we really want to probably number one on our goals, because I think that it's going to be a lengthy process, and I think that we need to get started now before fire season. And as you're saying, before the funds run out. And I think once we get our name, it's like the interchange. I'll tell you, we were way at the bottom of the docket to even get an interchange in. But once you start voicing your need and your want, you know, ears start listening. And so I think we need to start even on the state level. I think there's they need to hear from us that we have a concern.
Got it.
Chris, you're.
Well, my comments, we're going around.
Well,
the
we're
table.
just, let's do a round table. Let's pick off one thing at a time. And I'd like to stay on this subject of fire and goals.
Well, I thought we're on comments from commissioners, but my comment.
Non-agenda items is what we're doing here.
Well, my comment was going to go to what we're talking about now, and what I would suggest is that we agendize this for the next meeting to talk about whether we should move forward, because we got this information last time. I did some research, but I really would love to have us discuss this and then agendize it and then talk about whether to move forward with it or not. I did some research on this and there was a report done in 2020 for Medford, which I read today. Which seems to me it's 3 miles down the road. It had recommendations that we can just pull. It talks about the greenway. It talks about the fires on the greenway. It really addressed some of the things I was concerned about last time. There's also one for Ashland, 2017, I think. So there's a report already done, and it does recommend code changes. And there's a separate attachment. So I think we should talk about this next time and agendize it and say, hey, how do we want to move forward with this? And research it. And I'd like to send you the information that I found today and then have you send it out for information for the council, for the commission.
So code changes, especially like the landscaping. You know, I mean, it's upgrading, certain landscaping is more fire resistant than other landscapes. Is that what
And
you're
it does
referring
talk
to?
about that in the report to Medford. The report to Medford, you know, it was issued a few months before we had the Almeida fire. And I think it'd be good for us to discuss it next time, agendize it. That was my comment this time is I'd like to request an item to be agendized, which is this, and we can address everyone's question.
So does everybody agree that we need to agendize this item for the next meeting?
And
Just to clarify, this is just a recommendation of the staff.
Correct.
And look at some other
Yep.
options for it too, so would you want those included?
I would, I'd like to discuss, you know, our main, when we talked about it, it wasn't so much whether we hire these people or not, it's whether we get together and try to make recommendations to the code to help with prevention or preventing something like happened with the Almeida fire. I think that was our goal. I could be wrong, but it was kind of fire prevention in general.
Okay,
This was one of the suggestions that Julian came up with, which was
does
great.
everybody agree? I think so. Yeah, okay,
That was my comment.
that's good. Let's get that on the next agenda.
You got it.
Yeah, no, it's just, you know, we can take one at a time or have an open discussion because I don't want any idea lost. Nothing for you? Did you have something?
I think I did mention to staff, possibility of doing, and I'm willing to help with, putting together some of the onboarding for new commissioners. So
Right.
we could get introductions, introduction to public meeting laws and the processes, and so that we can help be as efficient as possible.
Yes.
As we integrate new.
That's good. Yeah, even for us that's been doing it for a while, it's a refresher and something like that. So if we could find out, I know usually RV Cog and all these guys always got something for us, and I've gone to some of them and
What I could do is this, if you like, I could put together a quick little menu, and then maybe just get feedback from you at the next meeting of like what sounds interesting and, you know, appropriate at this time. We're going to be doing a lot of code change work this year. That's like, seems to be the theme. Whereas last year was conditional use season, it seemed like. So, maybe I could just come up with a menu of options and we can throw that on the agenda, either formally or informally.
okay. Everybody agree with that? That we need more training's better.
Okay, you got it.
So,
And not, you know, the messenger is important and you put up the best message in the world, but sometimes having an independent third party to come in and give the message and say what we need to do and say those definitions might be better received, and I don't mean.
Yeah.
no, that's not,
Okay.
I think you agree. That's
Totally. Yeah.
They're out there. They're out.
We got,
there.
we got League of Oregon
Absolutely.
Cities. That's what I was just thinking. But what I found is the trainings. I just want to provide a menu and then you can make the call. But absolutely.
I think so.
Got it.
So that we can discuss it and openly, exactly.
I just went to a meeting with the fire department. I'm on the board over there and there was a meeting in in White City at the fire department, and it had people like us, it had people from school boards, it had city councilors there. It was a meeting, and I'm not sure how often they do it, but the Ethics Commission sends somebody out and they have a meeting where it talks about exactly what Councilor McFadden was saying, public meeting laws, and everybody attends that is part of people of groups that need to follow public meeting laws. And that was really, really good. Maybe they have other training sessions coming up. I could check on, or someone could check on it. But that was a great meeting. And I've attended those many times, and
Okay,
they're great.
good.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah, we'll just send them to Mr. Wilcox. Any ideas, any suggestions, anything that you can find that we could move forward on this, because it is important.
Counselor, Commissioner, are you also asking for the processes as to how our group should operate?
There's, for example, these offers, they offered a training, that was actually the fundamentals for planning commissions. So they actually specify going into the history of land use, but also into the roles and purview. So we know what our niche is and how we operate within the whole. As well as how to run a meeting, how to run a public hearing, the kinds of things, ways to stay out of hot water.
Yes.
Or some of those tips
Yeah.
too, how to help make defensible decisions. Those types of things that were really catered to planning commissioners, not just public meetings.
But I hear you. I just like to have maybe the document that is sort of the rules of procedure for our commission. For example, tonight, the speaker should have had 3 minutes to speak. That's the amount allotted, unless the presiding officer wants to allow more time. But Paul spoke for 15 minutes. That took a long time. We don't want everyone that's speaking to take 15 minutes, but there's certain rules and procedures I'd love to have as part of that.
I granted it last
Oh,
time.
okay.
Yeah, it was granted.
Yeah, but I'm just wanted to go over rules and procedures too for us as part of that. Public meeting laws.
It should be all part of it. Yeah, exactly.
There are.
Okay, good discussion.
That's what commissioners call.
Well, comment well taken. Anybody else have anything else that they'd like to add? You're kind of quiet over there.
My good compliment. And most of them are what I would say.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So if no more comments from commissioners,
Just
planner manager report.
Just a quick update from me. Zach wanted me to pass along a couple messages. He heard you loud and clear on the importance of fire resiliency, and he is working on a staff report for city council. So stay tuned. He'll have an update for you soon on that. One of the things he's working on, excited about, is a fire hardening grant that he's applying for through the federal government. So stay tuned there. What else? I wanted to, if we could, just quickly cover what's going on in town. I think you had mentioned that at the last meeting, like it might be kind of interesting.
Over here. Everybody's asking about Bear Creek Drive, what's going on there?
Yeah, so seismic retrofitting, some of the water system is my understanding. We have a post on our website about it. But yeah, my understanding is it's just retrofitting the existing infrastructure for the worst case scenario.
It's our tap line that comes from Medford.
Doesn't go through there, does it?
On the side, it's very close to the edge of the roadway. So they whittled it down to one lane and kind of snared traffic a little bit, but important project nonetheless. What else do we have going on?
They had some pictures of it at the meeting, the economic meeting that they had last week. And every time a pipe meets each other and goes another pipe, they're putting a brace around it. So they put a brace around each side of the fitting, and then they put these clamps around the sides of that fitting, and they squeeze it together. And in theory, instead of pipe pulling apart, it wouldn't pull apart because it's all braced now. And every little hole that you see in the ground, that's where the pipe meets. That's where they're putting the braces around it and clamping it together. That's retrofitting.
What's the big thing hanging on the side of the road that looks like it's just dangling?
The box,
Yeah.
they put that in there so they can work in there and it won't cave in on them.
Right.
It's a safety box for the work.
It just looks so precariously just kind
Yeah,
of.
I know.
So they dig the hole and then they set that in there, then the guys can get down in there and not have to worry about it caving in on them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It does look fun.
Sorry, Jeff, not to interrupt your, that was just something that I wanted people, in case they listen to this meeting, that they understand what is going on. Because I've had questions asked, I didn't know.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Well, no, I think the context is great there too, to know like, what is that big box all about? What is a retrofit? These are questions I don't have an answer to.
You sleep overnight.
It's, I'm glad you were here. Do you want to pull up that map, Christine, really quick? We'll talk about a couple private projects going on in town too. So we'll just zoom in a little bit, but so I believe design and engineering for that street. You want to zoom into the Pacific Corner, the new affordable housing project. So the zoning review for this one's almost complete, and design and engineering for that right of way just to the north of it. Can you pan up just a tiny bit? There you go. So that road up there is going to be a collector grade road with a multi-use path on the south side of it. Multi-use path can do bikes and pedestrian. So it'll be a nice upgrade to infrastructure there. And it'll help facilitate, future growth because PH 10 is just to the east there. And so at some point, that'll come into the city. What else is going on? Taco Bell is moving forward. They're just north of the city center. What else? We have a new application in for a modification to Pacific Wall Systems modular, wall unit business on the west end of town. And then a couple remediation projects going on. I'm sure you probably noticed there were two businesses. One on Highway 99, the mechanic shop there that had that cave in from the snow. So we have that cordoned off. They'll need to pull some permits, and same with Summit Beverage on the south center part of town. So we're going to be seeing some applications come in there soon.
Have they pulled demolition permits yet?
Summit has. It's been somewhat quiet.
You know when they can implode it? I want to watch.
Not a clue. It's
right.
all cordoned off.
Hmm.
What else? Maybe some action on the north side of town, but we haven't gotten an application in yet. But a lot of those properties in PH3 are coming in like daily, especially commercially zoned. So we keep this map updated as applications come in. You can just click those blue pointers there and see what the heck's going on.
Okay.
And that's it for my update. Christina, did you have anything from the building side of things? Pretty quiet.
No?
Just
All righty. Well, with that, it's 8:18. So with that, the meeting is agended and ended. Thank you.